Hi, my name is Lorne Brown. I'm a doctor of traditional Chinese medicine, and I practice in Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada. It's called AcuBalance Wellness Center. Our website's acubalance.ca. And today we're talking to Valerie Landis. And this is a really interesting interview for me. I met Valerie at the Integrated Fertility Symposium. She was there taking in lectures, and we just got a chance to chat. And then I discovered that this woman is a wealth of information, and she is a massive patient public advocate for fertility, and her expertise from all the research and looking around and her own personal experiences around egg freezing. Valerie, can you share a little bit about your background, and then let's get into egg freezing?
Yeah. Hey, thanks, Lauren. Thanks for inviting me. So my background, traditionally, I went to radiology school. And then I got an MBA in healthcare. But my traditional sense is I started out in sales and in medical sales, selling birth control and women's healthcare products in my early career, and then fell into fertility really naturally just as a sales rep and fell in love with it. So for me, that was like I found my destiny and my purpose. As far as egg freezing came about, it really didn't kind of take off. Egg freezing didn't really take off until like the early 2000s. And it really wasn't great technology until ASRM finally approved it as a non experimental procedure in 2012. So you can see how egg freezing is not that old. Of course, IVF isn't very old as well either. It's only, about 40 years old. So our practice or our professions have really just transpired and transformed over the last several years. And for me, it became a passion not only just personally, because I can see how egg freezing can be so beneficial for anyone these days, especially with the new trends in society and women empowerment and more women in the workplace and the family life changing. But I could also see how it could be beneficial for patients being their own egg donors, so they don't have to worry about how they're going to conceive their family in the future, and if their parenting partner, if they don't find their parenting partner right away. So for me, I just really fell in love and gravitated towards egg freezing because it seems to be like the most impactful for my age group.
And I like how you're talking about being your own egg donor, because when patients ask me about it, and we work with a local fertility clinic here in Vancouver, we do a lot of the prep work to get their eggs into their peak fertility potential before they go and do their freezing. But the question around it is, should I or should I not? And obviously that's a very personal decision. One of the main things, the way I look at it, it's kind of like car insurance. You have it, but you hope you don't have to use it. But if you have an accident, you're covered. You can get your automobile repaired, and it doesn't cost you any extra out of pocket because your insurance is covering it. And with the egg freezing, it kind of allows women that are in the middle of their careers, or they don't have a partner, but they're in their reproductive years, and in 5 to 10 years, they may have missed that reproductive window. They still have eggs now available to them with the potential to create life. And that way it gives women, kind of like what men have, the opportunity to have their careers in their lives and reproduce at a later age. That's the dream, the idea. It's still in its infancy, as in, although the egg freezing technology has advanced and it's so much better than it was in 2000 compared to where it is in 2012. There's still there's not a lot of thawing and making embryos yet, so we don't know. But the science looks good. What kind of information are you sharing with the public when women come to you? Like, is it okay to egg freeze? Does it work? And the reason I ask you, and I'll share with the audience, you're not a medical practitioner. However, so you don't have a license to practice. However, you got a lot of knowledge. I've looked at your website. We had some great conversations at the Integrated Fertility Symposium. I mean, you are a patient advocate, and you've created some incredible resources, talking to the experts, the medical doctors, talking to the public. And I just thought maybe you could give some tips for the public of what they should be looking into. Is there, from the research that you've been doing, is there an age where, it's getting a little bit late for this? When's the best timing? just some basic questions that you had to ask the experts that you've learned to save the people that are watching this some of that time, or at least they can take this information and go to their experts, their specialists, and ask those questions for themselves. So can you give us some good questions and answers that you went through that you recommend the public to be aware of?
Yeah, so I'll start at the beginning because I will clarify I'm not a medical physician. I do not hold a license, but I feel like sometimes, they say 10,000 hours of whatever skill will make you an expert. And not only have I experienced it personally, but I've also coached and seen so many patients throughout the years and their outcomes. And so I feel like I have a good representation to be the bridge of the gap between patients and the physicians. And so that's how I like to refer to myself is just really I'm here to calm all those fears, alleviate all those worries, and to explain how you'll feel from the beginning to the end, because that is a big concern. This is a little bit of a scary procedure when most, we're not taught really great reproductive health or even sexual health in school. And so the basics, the fundamental basics, most people don't really understand even their own cycle. I think there was a study done, with Yale that talked about how most women don't even understand when their peak times are to get pregnant. So if those key things are true, and then you throw in the millennials not, focusing more on their career and not getting married till later in life. I mean, the national average from just even first-time marriages has changed by like 6 years or something, which is a huge curveball. You can think of how many people have to wait later in life to get married for that time period to switch. Same for first-time births. I think it was normally like 26, and now it's like 28 or 29 even. Those 4 years, that means a lot of older parents had to start their family life much later in order for that needle to move that much. But as far as like key things about fertility and egg freezing, I think the first place to start is by getting your basic levels checked. So there's very non-invasive procedures that can be done to check your status of where you're at. And obviously, as most clinicians would even echo and say that, the younger you can freeze, the better. If we look at our egg donors, for example, which are rarely talked about, egg donors, we talk about sperm donation all the time, very freely and kind of haphazardly, right? But no one really talks about egg donation. But if you look at when women freeze their eggs for egg donation, so where they give their own physical DNA to another third-party reproduction, those women are from the ages of 20. I think the oldest is like 29. So that window is very short when they accept donors. Now, obviously, if you're your own egg donor, you don't have a cutoff of 29. You can donate your eggs at any given day. But your yield and the money that you spend to do egg freezing, the insurance plan, so to speak, would benefit you more if you go through that procedure when you were younger. So I always
it's interesting, Valerie, because just from a Chinese medicine concept understanding, they talk about, and this is not a rule, but women kind of age in cycles of 7. So your peak reproductive is 28, 7 times 4. This is 2,000 years old. And then your fertility, the most noticeable decline is at 7 times 5, 35. And they have all the reasons from a Chinese medicine perspective why this is happening. Now, we know, like you said, they like you to do it 29. So ideally, that's the ideal. But I always find it so interesting that modern science is confirming what they observed and documented 2,000 years ago. And again, for the public watching this, a lot of you are into egg freezing. So like Valerie said, this age limit of doing it before 30, that's hindsight's 2020. If you're 34, 35, and you haven't met that right person, or having a child right now is not able to happen, then you do the best you can. And this is where I'm curious, since you've been to the fertility symposium, Are you on board with women doing that? I call it make the next 100 days count. Those 3 to 4 months doing things to prepare yourself to get your fertility to the maximum potential. Because the testing I think you're looking at is the sex hormones, right? And
Right.
AMA. So
Mhm.
are your hormones in balance? And then what a lot of the Chinese medicine naturopathic clinics look at, these subtle signs like, do you have anxiety? Do you have insomnia? Is your period irregular? Do you have PMS? Do you have menstrual pain and clots?
Mhm.
Do you have eczema? Do you bloat a lot? If you have all these kind of different symptoms, it makes us think that on a cellular environment, things may be
Something
out of
bigger going
balance.
on.
Our goal for the follicle, which contains the egg, is to have this amazing environment with good blood flow going to it, so it has the ability and the best chance to reach its maximum fertility potential before an egg retrieval. So you went to that conference. What's your thoughts now on people egg freezing and doing some preconception care for those 100 days before they do their egg retrieval?
Yeah, I firmly believe that there's a key to that. I did some of my own preparation. So I'm a multi-freezer. I froze it a couple of times, and I've done it differently every single time. So the first time was like, oh, hurry up, we got to get you in, and I didn't have that like really 3 months, 90 days, 100 days to prepare. And we got an okay yield, but I was 33 at the time as well. And then the second time, I knew that I was going to do this again and really spent some hardcore time like upping my vitamin take, trying to eat healthy, pre-exercise, workouts, things of that nature. Made sure I did a lot of yoga, meditation. I was a lot more in tune. And then even this third time, I've been almost a year preparing for this, and it sounds crazy, but it's just my procedure was getting delayed as well. So that just happened on its own. And so I kept being like, okay, well then, I'm lowering, my drinking habits, and some of those lifestyle factors are super important. And it's hard to put your life on hold, and you don't have to do all of that. You can freeze without doing all these preparation. But I do think that if you're going to invest the cash and the resources to do this, that to make this time period kind of that moment where you are making yourself a temple and kind of like, preparing for this, could it impact your outcome exponentially. So I've even just seen like how the quality of eggs, like I had less eggs that didn't that were lost in the transition from being extracted to being frozen. So that could be contributed to the quality of eggs, and then it's also how you're stemmed. But I do think that there's a mind, body, spirit factor that I was kind of awakened to personally and then reaffirmed at the conference.
That's great to hear. And the epigenetics, so the health blueprint of your child is based on your health those 3 to 4 months leading up to
Right.
the egg retrieval. Like, so
Same for
it's
sperm.
not just, I share with my patients, getting pregnant and or freezing your eggs. Often people, I'm thinking more of the IVF. So they do an IVF and they get all these embryos and it's successful and they're feeling really excited. To me, that is the very beginning, because you're doing this to raise a child. And so that's a long time, a lifetime.
Right.
And so the preparation's a few months, and then the pregnancy is less than a year.
Yeah.
And then you have the rest of your life. So really, sometimes we lose the whole purpose. And it's not a race to get pregnant. Mm-hmm. It's about that temple. I like your pregnancy. Term. It's a temple. And we now know, and Dr. Paul Magarelli's talk at the Integrated Fertility Symposium, again, was showing data to reaffirm what was talked about and documented over 2,000 years ago in Chinese medicine, that the health of the man and the woman at the time of conception impacts not just the next generation, but multiple generations. And so women that are going to be doing egg freezing, your state of health, not just you get your period and then 2 weeks later or 3 weeks later you have the retrieval, but what was your health the 4 months, those 100 days leading up to that retrieval? And that's a good gauge of how it's going to impact. You mentioned something that I want to touch on then, because I think this is a question I have and the public has. You mentioned you did a couple of cycles to get yield. So to set expectations, it's very often not a one time to freeze eggs. Not all eggs will turn into embryos, which will turn into babies. So are you aware of, from your researching this, what's how many cycles or how many eggs you'd want to bank, even based on age. I believe there's some data on this, but I'm wondering if you have any insights on this from your research.
There's some amazing calculators out there. I like to call it egg math. I kind of coined that phrase in my own head, where like essentially that you got to plan, you got to start with understanding how many children you want. And you can always conceive naturally, but this is for like possibly baby number 2 or baby number 3. And the reason I've banked so many eggs, so I've just under 30 currently banked, and I'm working on another cycle for another round, is because if I want potentially 3 children, given that I've done this in my early 30s or mid 30s, I need at least 35 to 40 eggs to get that goal. If every 2 to 12% per egg turns into a live birth, if you know that statistic, then every dozen eggs or so, given the fact that you did that in your early 30s, could potentially turn into a live birth. But it also depends on the sperm factor. So you can't forget that, my DNA is only 50% of the equation. So depending on who I pick as a sperm donor or my future partner, that will dictate a lot of the success as well. So it's not just about my egg quality being great, but about the co-partner as well, which you were mentioning with Dr. Megan.
100%. It takes 2 to make a baby. And Dr. Paul Turek has discussed in some of the videos that we've shared that often poor embryo development is related to the male. And it's hard to detect that through the semen analysis that you can give life. But this is more on egg freezing. So obviously you want good sperm, so that there's that. So maybe if your guy's in his late 30s, maybe he should be freezing his sperm. But from the egg freezing perspective, it's really good to repeat this. You're saying 2 to 12% of the eggs could turn into babies.
A live birth, which is much different than just an embryo, because while they might make it to day 5 blastocyst or day 3 blastocyst, which we hope they make it to day 5 because they're a stronger embryo, it doesn't mean that it will implant. You still have to have a great uterus. So it takes like 5 things for a perfect scenario, right? It takes a good egg, a good sperm, a healthy embryo, and then a great uterus. And all of those factors have to be in order to make the healthy baby. So
and so your part is the egg freezing. And just again, the expectations, it's not usually one yield. You're going to need, depending on how many babies you want, but you're going to want.
If you're getting started in your 30s, I would suggest that you just plan on that, like give yourself 3 rounds for the best odds, right? So, but if you're doing it in your 20s, maybe you only need 1 or 2 rounds. So it really just depends. It kind of goes back to the basics, where if you test your AMH levels and if OBGYN started doing this on a regular basis, then we could see the progression over time and be like, okay, wow, you've hit a peak point. Maybe it's really time that you freeze. But because that's not currently being done in the medical industry right now, I think that we're digressing and kind of playing catch up, right? So it's not lost on me that this is a huge commitment to motherhood. And a lot of people aren't sure that they even want to be mothers. It's about giving yourself the most options and landscape that if you did want to become a mother, it wouldn't be extremely hard in order to do so. And the longer you wait, we see celebrities all the time giving birth at 40 or 50, and it looks simple, but you didn't know, they're not obligated to tell us how they conceived or if they used an egg donor from someone else and it isn't even their biological child. So I think that it's a little misleading, but there's great advocates out there. Like, for example, Kim Kardashian's used a surrogate for the last 2 pregnancies because of her inability to carry. And that can just show you that just because you're not able to hold a pregnancy doesn't mean that you can't still become a parent. And that's what's so great about egg freezing, is that it can be your DNA implanted in someone else, or you could be your own egg donor and hopefully have a uterus that would be able to carry to term, because our uteruses outlast the quality of our eggs. So our eggs get old around 40, and we can actually conceive if we had a healthy embryo well into our late 40s. So it maybe not be recommended. You might be high risk. You might get a placenta previa. Like there's 10 many things that can happen during pregnancy. There's a lot of steps to get to a successful live birth, but it at least increases the odds and possible success rates.
And with the older women, it's the challenge. We're talking there's two scenarios going on here. One is these women now that are teenagers, early 20s, educating them about egg freezing in their 20s as a way of insurance, a safety net for them to have children later in life.
Yeah.
And maybe never use these because they do find somebody and they're able to conceive in their youth. A lot of the women that are looking into the egg freezing are over 35 and they haven't found somebody. And so they're asking these questions about freezing their eggs rather than doing a donor sperm or getting pregnant now. They're hoping they can freeze their eggs. And what we're finding is with the older women, they need even more eggs. And yet with the older women, it's more challenging to get those more eggs for freezing. So it's a challenging time. And what they do, or what, again, we encourage is all the things that are within your power to, I always say, to kind of help you be as biologically young as possible. So you have a chronological age. You talked about 40. You could be chronologically 40, but biologically behaving like 50. Your hormone levels are out of whack. You might have had IVF where you're not responding well. And our goal at our clinic is, can we get you biologically 40 again?
Yeah, that happens actually.
When you're chronologically 30.
That happens even in the 20-year-olds. I mean, there are women that are in their 20s that have unexplained infertility. And so, there could be ovarian reserve loss. There could be many different factors that even if you feel young, it doesn't dictate what your eggs are actually going through.
Definitely. And with the young women, if they have a low, so again, for those that have done your AMH is not, at this point in time,
the only predictor.
AMH is not an indicator of quality. It's an indicator of quantity. And a woman in her late 20s, early 30s with a low AMH can still have healthy babies.
Yeah.
If you were doing an IVF, for example, there's a risk of not getting as many embryos. But if one woman has 10 embryos and you have a lower AMH and you get 5 embryos, you both get babies. It's just one has a lot more leftovers.
Right. And I always say, it's a numbers game. So you want to give yourself the best odds. And that's why we encourage multiple rounds and don't try to make this like a one set solution. What's interesting is in the early, like 2010, 2011, 2012, when egg freezing was first deemed as non-experimental and free to anyone, not just cancer patients or some life-threatening illness, most of the average age of women that were coming and I was speaking to were in the range of 37, 38, 39. So they had just heard about it and they were the ones that needed it the most because their life span of children, that window was getting smaller, and that window was closing biologically. But now, given that we're in 2019, the age actually has dropped, and I'm getting as young as 25-year-olds coming to me and asking questions about some of these basics. So, I think there's definitely a draw, and women really want to understand and wrap their head around this entire concept. What I find interesting is that the reason egg freezing even exists, because we've been freezing sperm for hundreds of years, it feels like, even though fertility is only 40 years old. It's definitely seen many different landscapes. But for egg freezing, it really came about because the Catholic Church didn't want to destroy embryos. And it really benefited everyone in general because now we don't have to worry about our current partner situation only having them to rely on to make embryos in order to conceive and become parents. Like now we can do something for ourselves as women and kind of catch up to the biology of men, which I think is very powerful.
And the technology has changed. So the freezing technology, the thaw wasn't so successful because of the freezing technology, but as of right now, the vitrification technology for freezing, you get a better thaw rate. And so this has made egg freezing more of a viable option. Yeah. And you mentioned the church, so good to see the church has some, it turned out to be a good thing, as in it allowed technology and scientists to find a way for women, basically as a way for women in their early years, in their 20s and 30s, to see if they can prolong their reproductive lifespan by
Right.
freezing eggs. So any other suggestions? Again, you've been through this, and so I'm just curious, like, if somebody comes to you and they're going to your websites, and please shout out some of the websites where they can learn more about this. But if somebody was a girlfriend's coming to you, or just somebody that's arm's length, and they're like, where do I start? What do I do? I'm 30 years old. I got this great career. I haven't found anybody I'm interested in. I don't want to marry for the sake of having babies. I want to meet somebody that's a great fit. I'm thinking about egg freezing. Can you
Yeah.
give me some suggestions, please?
Sure. So, I mean, first off, it's arm yourself with knowledge and then get tested. So that's step number one. So, understanding your body and how it works, understanding the cliffs and the cutoffs, and it's a little hard, I think, because we're wrestling with, and I felt like this as well, that if I wouldn't have had the career path and the trajectory that I did, I don't know that I would have accessed egg freezing in 2015 at 33 years old. Like, it probably just wouldn't have been on my to-do list of things to check off. But I'm the perfect demographic because I see and feel exactly what everyone's dealing with, is that, I had this very aggressive career path. I was traveling and working, multiple states in the US and traveling overseas. I was running clinical trials in Europe. I didn't have time to date. And even the people that I did date, maybe they weren't going to turn out to my parenting partner. I mean, I had a couple of relationships that were 4 years long each, and you thought, oh, for sure, this was just going to happen. You never expected it not to happen. So when that realization came that I couldn't rectify my family future the same time I was hoping that my career and everything else would come into balance, egg freezing became that perfect relief for me to buy me some time. And really, it gave me about between 5 and 6 additional years, which may be enough for what I need, unless I decide to be a parent on my own. But the real goal in my personal situation is to parent with a parenting partner, or become a mother with a parenting partner. So you have to put work and diligent effort into that. But so getting your baseline AMH level tested, getting an antral follicle count, having that tested every single year, then you can watch that progression. So if you start with that younger, I think is definitely helpful. So I think, the millennials have such an advantage because the technology of vitrification and how egg freezing works is now coming up to a period of time where our technology has met our social demands, like where we are as in the society of how we view family and parenthood. But it touches the deep core of like who we are as humans, like what our value system is. So I think, wrestling with that first too, and kind of understanding that you shouldn't feel guilty for having these feelings, because I think, it's easier for men to put that off and to not talk about how maybe they want a family until later. It's just more they're geared that way. It's okay to have these feelings, I think, is understanding that. But
And so step one is getting tested, and my understanding is just to see what kind of response to prepare
Yeah.
you. Like, do they expect a good yield based on your age, antral follicle count, which is how many follicles they can see that they can stimulate. AMH, again, another measure of ovarian reserve. Again, kind of a quality measurement, not a quantity.
Right.
Looking at some of your sex hormones, making
Yeah.
sure things are in balance. So are you a candidate for egg freezing?
We'll
So
never
that's
know
step
quality
one.
until we make embryos. So that's the hard part.
Yes, we won't know. But you sent me that link on, and all of fertility here locally is involved somehow on this because they sent me the link as well. There's some technology, and maybe it's even an app that's looking at the eggs to predict quality.
Yeah.
So
Artificial intelligence. There's definitely new research out there that have been trying to analyze how do we look at good quality and find quality eggs. So maybe in the future we'll not, crack that nut. But at the moment, we don't have any great testing out there.
experimental. I know they're doing some of the research is being done here in Vancouver with that technology.
Yeah, I think there's a couple
when
of
you sent me
places
that
in
link,
Canada.
I sent it to them, and they're like, "Yeah, we're involved." So
That's awesome. Yeah, I mean, there's some amazing stuff out there. I think we just need to do the scientific research and back it up with proven data.
So get tested, and then is there other steps where you just find a clinic and you start freezing eggs? I know you're into that preconception. You mentioned you're going to do another one. Now I get it. Because at the Integrated Fertility Symposium, like every day I would see you under that laser.
Yes.
I was like, I thought she's done. Now I get it. You were getting a little
whatever boost works. I mean, listen, I do think that there's a whole body component here, that it's not just, DNA. DNA has a huge factor in a lot of how your outcomes are, but your lifestyle factors can impact things as well. So smoking, for example, is the #1 killer of eggs. And if you can just simply stop that, you're doing yourself a huge favor. And then lifestyle factors, eating well, balancing everything in moderation. I like to say, like, you don't have to give up alcohol, right? But it does help if anything with common sense. If it doesn't make sense, then you probably shouldn't do it. So.
Right, and you're talking about the cell death. It's apoptosis, cell death. And with the smoking, excessive alcohol, the endocrine disruptors, the chemicals in the environment, even stress, the DNA, it's impacted by its environment. So what you eat, what you think, like
gut health,
so that's
probiotics, all these things, they impact things tremendously.
So there's a lot of things you can't control. And so, the world is somewhat toxic. So you're not going to be able to live in a bubble. Most people won't. However, you can choose certain things that you're putting into your body and what you're putting around yourself. You can work on stress reduction.
Right.
We're obviously, because of our practice, we're advocates of acupuncture for the blood flow to the ovaries.
Amazing.
We use
There's
we're
abdominal
pioneering
massage.
low-level laser therapy. So
Yep.
we do the laser to improve mitochondrial function and blood flow and reduce that oxidative stress. So you like the diet, the lifestyle, the exercise, and then basically it's finding a clinic that's hopefully locally that fits with you, and then being prepared to do a few cycles to get enough eggs that can reach your goals of how many kids you want, based on the current stats of 2 to 12% of these eggs can turn into a baby.
Right. And I think, that is a key point too. Finding the physician in the doctor's office that you feel comfortable with, having those pre-discussions up front. What are the costs? Maybe negotiating a 3-cycle, situation where you can, do that up front before you jump in, because once you jump in, it's really hard to leave a practice. It's really hard to switch doctors. All your medical records, getting them to one location was hard enough, right? So, and your STI clearances and your regular PAPs and all those detailed medical records, you probably just don't want them floating around to multiple clinics. So interview, take some time and honor those decisions and go with your gut. I always say that, there's just like there's a lid for every pot, there's a doctor for every patient. And don't feel bad if you don't click with a certain doctor, but also do your research on the lab and the team as a whole.
What can people find on some of your websites? And please, now is a great time to kind of share the websites that you offer.
Sure.
And then just so what they're going to find on each website to help them on this journey, please.
Yeah, so I've been building content around this subject matter for quite some time, and basically building everything I wish I would have had before I got started, even knowing all the details that I knew and working in medical health within women's health for the last decade or so. But experience.com will give you stories and different examples and resources that you can use. So like other websites, other podcasts. It's basically a curation of all of everything egg freezing. It's everything egg freezing and back. You can find in one central location. Then the podcast Eggology Club is, for the individuals that want to tune into something audio. You can listen to all of the different paths to parenthood and different stories and outcomes. So you can kind of see this this happened to this person, and be aware of all the potential factors of what happens when you go through IVF and fertility and egg freezing. And then right now I'm making a video doc series called This is Egg Freezing, highlighting my past experience just freezing myself and what it looks like. So what egg freezing looks like from start to finish, the ups, the downs, the emotional, the shots, the trigger, the under the anesthesia, behind in the lab. Like, these are all things that you may not realize what you're getting yourself into. And I just want to bring transparency across the board for everyone to see what egg freezing or the early stage of IVF can look like.
Excellent. So thank you so much for putting together those resources. That's great help. Again, I've always found, it's always nice when you know somebody's gone through this before.
Yeah.
And rather than you have to go through the whole experience yourself and collect this information, it's nice for people who are starting to build on your experience, right? So they can stand on your shoulders with gratitude for doing this. So
I'm passing the baton, but there were people that passed the baton to me. So I mean, it's definitely it's been a labor of love and a passion project of mine to share this information, because I feel like it's so impactful. Like, just like you said, Lorne, it's about knowing that you're not alone in this process and watching someone else go through it, because it is very private. I'm okay with being the public spokesperson or the egg freezing advocate that's always whispering in your ear, do it, do it, do it, because there's so much negative news and press and media out there that isn't telling the whole story. They want the eyeballs. They're after, that media push for their own selfish views, and it's really good to see a balance of the whole system and not just one piece of the pie.
Excellent. Great advice. So thank you very much for this again, Valerie. And maybe next time we'll get on, we'll talk about how the Chinese concept of nourish the soul before you plant the seed. So what women can do, whether they're going into an IVF or they're into egg freezing, how to support their bodies to get to that maximum fertility potential. Keep up the great work.
Well, what's nice is that egg freezing is the first half of IVF. So it applies to everyone in one shape or another.
Oh, I agree. My focus is healthy baby. You're saying earlier about the variables that are involved for making a life.
Yeah.
And I share my equation. I used to be a CPA. I'm a CPA, but I don't practice anymore. A certified professional accountant. Did my bachelor of science in math. So I like formulas. So I always say healthy baby equals healthy egg plus healthy sperm plus healthy uterine environment.
It's a math equation.
Dr. Paul Magarelli always goes, my God. He goes, I like mine so much better. His is healthy body, fertile body. I'm like, that is much better.
Well, those are some good combos. I mean, it is an equation factor. I feel like everything affects everything, and that sounds so cliche to say, but for example, if you have acne and you have a breakout, there's something bigger going on underneath the skin or your endocrine system that you're just not aware of. And so if you treat the whole person and worry about, maybe there's some meds that can help clear that up, then we can
Don't take those meds that will clear it up, by the way, like Accutane and stuff. So I just want to be clear. Because I don't know how I don't know if that is the right intervention, but the acne idea, again, to bring in the medicine, Chinese medicine, just the understanding of the body from so long ago without having mapped the nervous system, the hormonal system, they look at, and so we as practitioners, think of it as like a tree. To understand the health of the roots, we don't have to dig up the roots. We look at the branches and leaves. And if we see one branch or leaf that looks sickly, we know it's isolated to that. The roots are probably okay. But if the whole tree is sick, we know there's something going on in the root level. So taking that analogy or this metaphor of acne, we know there's hormonal imbalance, inflammation. And remember, the body has this innate ability to heal, to self-regulate. This is the body's way of trying to maintain homeostasis, equilibrium. So this toxicity, this imbalance, this inflammation, it's trying to express it. And then we're going in with some of the treatments to suppress it. And then it just shows up in other organ systems. So we
Well, it
like to
takes
look
time.
it's like
Not
a
everything.
fibroid or a cyst. Think about this.
Yeah.
People are like, oh my God, that is an awesome body trying to
Mm-hmm.
quarantine something not very good, most likely. Right?
Right.
And so what is the underlying, so you have a cyst or you have cysts, or you have fibroids. So where is this coming from? Where is this coming from? So we keep asking, not like, okay, you're 35 and you have PCOS. Why? Like, what's going on?
Yeah.
Where is your
We need,
inflammation
well,
coming
that's
from?
that's a
Where's your
great
blood
point.
sugar
We
coming
need to
from?
be asking why and going to the root of the problem rather than just treating the source and then thinking we've solved the
Don't
problem.
treat the symptoms. So
Yeah.
you're saying go to the cause. That is exactly the Chinese medicine, functional medicine, naturopathic way, because we don't have these great tools of IVF to override the body. So
Yeah.
if we're going to help the body conceive naturally or support it in an IVF, we want the body working in balance and working optimally. So we look for the underlying cause. And at AccuBalance in Vancouver, because I'm a CPA, we call it the fertility audit, but it's the kind of audit you want,
Right.
right? Where we go and we do the conventional testing, and then we do all these functional medicine testing, because when you look at the spectrum of health, we have disease over here or vitality way over here. And often the testing will be on this side. And if you don't have absence of disease, we incorrectly call health. But in Chinese medicine, health is vitality. And so these tests, your tests may be normal, but you have unexplained infertility, you're really cold, you get PMS and painful periods, et cetera, et cetera. That's not health. That's just on the spectrum of where you are from vitality to very sick. And so even though your conventional tests are normal, we like to look at your signs and symptoms more and do other testing, because our goal is vitality. You get out of bed full of energy, you feel optimistic, you have daily bowel movements, you digest your food without bloating, and you reproduce with ease. That's the goal, right?
Right.
So
yeah.
that's
Those are some really great factors. I mean, and I think that it goes back also to even for example, STDs and STIs. We think, oh, well, some of these, diseases or infections, there's no big deal because there's not a lot of symptoms. Well, there could be lifelong symptoms that we don't even know about that could affect your fertility, and that's why we're getting the diagnosis of infertility. And so, what you do as a young person definitely affects your ability to reproduce as when you age.
And it's the big picture. You said the lifelong. Our goal really is not for you to get pregnant. Our goal is for you to have a healthy baby and a healthy mom and a healthy partner if there's a partner involved.
Right.
That's what we want. That's the community, the family unit. That's what's important. And so we do our best to, yes, we're wanting to get you pregnant as soon as possible.
Right.
However, our goal, if we go back to that formula, healthy baby equals healthy egg plus healthy sperm plus healthy uterine environment, our goal is healthy baby, whether that happens in the lab, so egg freezing, IVF, or that happens in the bedroom, we want healthy baby. And I have to say in my practice, sometimes it's in the best interest for the woman that it happens in an IVF setting. So our goal is healthy baby, not how to. And now with IVF being able to do some genetic testing, some genetic screening, it's also another way to help increase the live birth rate.
I mean, it's not sexy to necessarily conceive a child with IVF, right? It's not like you put the dimmers down in the mood lighting and pop. Oh, that's great. But if it gets you to the end goal, that's the sacrifice that you're
right. And who says why not? Maybe we get the embryology labs to start playing Marvin Gaye in the lab. So
Well,
I don't think we can have the candles with all the nitrogen and oxygen.
Conceived with love, right? It's conceived with love. It just it wasn't the old-fashioned way. But we're having babies with more intention now. Like we're able to get to the healthy baby instead of increasing the number of miscarriages that maybe the women might have, or potentially having a Down syndrome baby or a genetically unhealthy child. And it can just alleviate all of those future problems.
And I'm acknowledging that we didn't discuss here, but there's tons of ethical debate and discussion around all of this, which wasn't part of this conversation. But I don't want to say we're ignoring that either. That is also...
It's a personal choice.
So personal choice.
It's a personal choice.
And so check out Valerie's website. She has taken the time through her personal experience and then just for her passion for her to help others has built several resources for you to look at. So I encourage you to look at that, watch the videos, listen to the podcast, read the articles. So thank you for putting that together.
Of course.
For our listeners, on the AccuBalance.ca website, we've talked about what you can do to make the next 100 days count, and that's about how to help maximize fertility potential.
We should have 100-day challenges, Lorne.
Yes, we got that coming up. I challenge my patients every day, but yes, the 100-day challenge. And I will share with people, because a lot of people think, oh, I do 100 days and then I'm done. And
no, it's just the beginning.
That's misleading too. People think, oh, it's just 100 days. So if I went and just looking at the physiology, how we understand it from a very Western perspective, it's not like when you ovulate or you do an IVF, it's like the last 2 weeks that matter. Oh, I menstruated. Now I better be healthy for the next 2 weeks and not smoke and not drink excessively. That quality of that egg is based on the last year almost, and definitely the last 100 days are most impactful. So every month, several follicles get recruited and they go through a 200 and some odd day recruitment process. And the last 100 days is where there's the most change and growth in those follicles before it's either ovulated or picked up in an IVF. And so that 100 days is about preparing it. So I always say, if you came into my clinic and I went abracadabra, because people think it's magic or hocus pocus what we do sometimes, but if I went, so I do that, I put on my little hat and I go abracadabra. And if everything is in balance now, your body is optimized, I would expect 100 days, those follicles would be at their maximum potential. So if I went abracadabra, that next cycle, that follicle only had 2 weeks of magical environment. The cycle after, it had 6 weeks. And so 100 days after my abracadabra, then I would expect every ovulation after that to be at its peak potential. But unfortunately, it's very rarely abracadabra. So it takes several months to get you into optimal balance, and then you want to maintain it. And so my analogy, for those that used to watch Michael Jordan in basketball, he was one of the best NBA players. Even though he won all these MVPs, even though he won all these championships, he was still the first in the gymnasium. He still practiced. He didn't have the attitude, oh, I'm the best now.
He didn't come up to the fact where he was like, I made it, now I can stop. It's always
you want to know, can I maintain this level? Can I take it a little higher?
Further? Yeah.
And so what I encourage you that are doing the diet changes and the lifestyle changes, it's not 100-day and then you're done. Mm-hmm. It's 100-day kickstart. So you're kind of really working it for those 100 days. And then you go into maintenance, and it's not that much effort after, but it's still effort. It's not like you get to go back to an abusive relationship. You go back to eating poorly and smoking
stress and anxiety.
You still maintain. And if you're seeing an acupuncturist, maybe you're seeing them 2 or 3 times a week for acupuncture and laser and those 100 days. After those 100 days, you may still want to maintain it and see them once a week. Just not as often. So, and you're still going to eat well. So I just wanted to put that out, because a lot of people will do 100 days and then they go back, they make all these improvements and then they go back to their old bad habits. And if that's the case, then you're going to create that poor environment. So it's important to maintain what you've done. And one more metaphor, like they say, when a plane takes off, I'm not a pilot or an engineer, so I'll take this from what I've heard. I could be incorrect, but it takes a lot of fuel to take off. And then once it hits its altitude, it doesn't need as much fuel, but it still uses fuel. So those first 100 days, this is what we're doing. You're making some changes, supplements, exercise, mind, body, acupuncture, laser, all the lovely stuff you're doing.
Sacrifice.
And then you get up here, you're still doing it, just not as intensely.
I always say, imagine how great you're going to feel after that first 90 days. Why would you ever want to go back? Like now it's a lifestyle change.
The feedback I get from the women I see, and men, but we see a lot more women than men, just culturally, women are more proactive.
Yeah.
But somewhere in that 100 days when I'm working with women, I do a lot of the mind body with the acupuncture, laser, and dietary therapy. Some point they say, regardless whether I have child or don't have child, this has been so worth my time and money, because physically, emotionally, they have found some peace and serenity, and their symptoms have diminished or changed or gone. And that to me is how we can get 100% success when we're looking on the fertility side. If people come out of this and they're going to be okay, better than okay, whether they have a child or not, then that to me is successful. Now, I know when you're looking for a child at the beginning, you can't imagine you'd ever be at that place.
You have blinders on, right? Like you're focused on the goal.
Yeah, and that's great, because if you don't focus on the goal, you don't achieve the goal. And so this is the other part of it. And from an egg freezing perspective, just to tie it all back in, there's things you can do in those 100 days plus leading up to the egg freezing. Do check out Valerie's websites for those resources. And you can check out AccuBalance.ca as well, and just use these as resources. And I hope it helps you on your journey to lead you to a healthy family. That's our goal for you, to help set that health blueprint for your future child, so that you're healthy and your child, and if there's a partner you're with, they're healthy as well.
Amazing.
Thank you, Valerie.
Thank you.